Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to do the development of nose. Development of nose starts in the fourth week of the development, where there is a thickening in the ectoderm appears in the inferior part of the frontonasal prominence, and these thickenings are called as nasal plaque-cords. Around these nasal plaque-cords, there is proliferation of the mesenchyme, and that is called as medial and lateral nasal swellings. With the formation of these nasal swelling, the nasal plaque cord, it is converted into nasal pit. The one factor is the proliferation of the mesenchyme around it, and second factor is the deepening of the nasal plaque cord into the underlying mesenchyme. And once nasal pits are formed, they start to deepen. And these deepened nasal pits are then called as nasal sacs. Here is the nasal sac, and it is separated from the primitive oral cavity through a membrane called as oronasal membrane. This nasal sac, it grows dorsally, ventral to the developing forebrain. And at the end of the sixth week, this membrane starts to rupture. There is a communication between the primitive nasal cavity and the oral cavity, and this opening posteriorly is called as primitive guana. There is development of epithelial plugs in the nasal cavity, and these epithelial plugs are formed by the proliferation of the epithelial cells lining them, but they are temporary, and they are usually dissolved by the end of 13th to 15th week. It's a picture in which different stages of the development of nose are shown. Here's the formation of the nasal sac. There's intact oronasal membrane. Here you see there's rupture of the nasal membrane, and here there is wide communication between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity through through the opening called as primordial guana, and there's a formation of primary palate. With the formation of the secondary palate, this nasal cavity opens into the pharynx through the definitive guana. As all this is happening, there are some elevations on the lateral wall of the nose that is called as nasal concha, and uh, there is thickening of the epithelium uh, that is called as olfactory epithelium, right? And there is thickening in the ectoderm, and the cells appearing in this epithelium are of three types. Number one, there are sensory cells called as olfactory cells, and number two, there are supporting cells. They are also called sustentacular cells, and thirdly, there are cells called as basal cells, or basal cells are actually support stem cells. And the axons of the olfactory cells, which are the sensory cells, they will form the olfactory nerve, which will reach the olfactory bulb of the brain. Here again, this is olfactory epithelium and olfactory nerve. It's reaching to the olfactory bulb. There's a formation of the elevation in the lateral wall of the nose that is called as conchae. There's formation of primary palate and secondary palate, and here's the definitive guana, the opening of the nasal cavity posteriorly into the nasopharynx. Nasolacrimal duct appears in the nasolacrimal groove. The nasolacrimal groove is present between the maxillary prominence and the lateral nasal prominence. Initially, there is thickening of the ectoderm in this groove. Uh, uh, but later on, it is canalized to form the nasolacrimal duct. And the upper end of this nasolacrimal duct widens to form the lacrimal sac. In adults, nasolacrimal duct extends from the medial angle of the eye to the inferior meatus of the nose. Nasal septum is formed from the frontonasal prominence, and inferiorly it merged with the developing palate. And the paranasal sinuses, they are actually formed by the uh, formation of diverticuli from the developing nasal cavity, and there is pneumatic extensions. Mean there's extension of air-filled cavities into the surrounding bones, and the initial opening from which these extensions start, they will that will form the opening of the paranasal air sinus. And but at birth, only maxillary sinus is present, and the rest of the sinuses, they develop after birth, and they reach their maximum size at puberty. Thank you.